The morning sun cast long shadows across St. Peter's Square as Pope Leo XIV emerged from the basilica. Despite the early hour, tourists and pilgrims already filled the plaza, cameras ready, hoping for a glimpse of the first American pontiff. But Leo's attention was drawn elsewhere. At the edge of the square, partially hidden in the shadow of a column, sat a man in tattered clothes, head bowed, a small cardboard sign propped against a worn military backpack. The Pope paused, his eyes lingering on the solitary figure while his security detail waited anxiously. Without warning, Leo changed direction and began walking directly toward the homeless man. The Swiss guards scrambled to keep up, exchanging concerned glances as whispers rippled through the crowd. "Your Holiness, we should continue to the scheduled meeting," one aide whispered urgently. Pope Leo simply raised his hand slightly, a gentle but firm gesture that silenced any further objections. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of compassion and unexpected moments of humanity, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. As Pope Leo approached, the homeless man didn't look up. His weathered hands clutched a worn military cap, fingers tracing the faded insignia with a reverence that spoke of years of service and sacrifice. Only when the shadow of the Pope fell across him did the man raise his eyes, tired eyes that had seen too much, that had witnessed the horrors of war and the coldness of indifference. Recognition flickered across the veteran's face, followed by disbelief. He attempted to stand, his movements stiff and labored, but Leo immediately motioned for him to remain seated, and to everyone's astonishment, the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church lowered himself to sit beside the homeless veteran on the cold stone steps. "I'm Michael," the man said, his voice rough from disuse. "I served in Afghanistan and Iraq. 2 tours." "I'm Leo," the Pope replied simply, as if they were just 2 men sharing a bench in a park. "It's an honor to meet you, Michael." For several minutes they spoke quietly, their conversation private, despite the growing crowd of onlookers. The Pope listened intently as Michael spoke, nodding occasionally, his expression compassionate yet focused. When Michael gestured to his leg, pulling up his pant leg to reveal a prosthetic limb, Pope Leo reached out and gently placed his hand on the veteran's shoulder. What happened next spread through social media within hours, dominating headlines and news cycles around the world. Pope Leo XIV, the 267th Bishop of Rome and leader of 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide, canceled his entire morning schedule. Instead, he personally escorted Michael to the Vatican Medical Center, walking beside him the whole way, supporting him when necessary, ignoring the flashing cameras and the stunned expressions of Vatican officials. But this was just the beginning. 3 days later, Pope Leo addressed the global community from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The square below was packed with thousands of faithful, and millions more watched via live stream. Behind him stood Michael, no longer in tattered clothes but dressed simply and with dignity, still somewhat uncomfortable in the spotlight but standing tall. "Brothers and sisters," Leo began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Today, I want to speak about a disease that plagues our society: indifference. We walk past human suffering every day. We avert our eyes from pain. We convince ourselves that someone else will help, that poverty and homelessness are problems too big for us to solve." The Pope turned slightly, gesturing to Michael. This man served his country with honor. He sacrificed his health, his body, and parts of his soul in service to others. And how did we repay this sacrifice? With neglect, with bureaucracy, with indifference. Leo's voice grew stronger, more impassioned. This is not a political issue. This is a human issue. This is a moral issue. And today, I am announcing the creation of the Pontifical Commission for Veterans and Displaced Persons. This commission will work directly with governments, non-governmental organizations, and religious institutions of all faiths to address the crisis of veteran homelessness worldwide. The crowd erupted in applause, but Leo raised his hand for silence. Words are easy. Promises are comfortable. Real change requires action, sacrifice, and commitment. This commission will not just be another bureaucratic office. It will have resources, authority, and clear objectives. Then, in a move that shocked even his closest advisors, Pope Leo announced that he was immediately repurposing several Vatican-owned properties around the world to serve as transitional housing for homeless veterans. The first property, a historic building just blocks from the Vatican that had long served as luxurious apartments for visiting dignitaries, would be converted immediately. "We cannot preach charity while hoarding wealth," Leo declared. "We cannot speak of compassion while surrounded by opulence. The Church must lead by example." The announcement sent shockwaves through religious and political circles. Conservative Catholics criticized the move as politically motivated and overreaching. Government officials from various countries expressed concerns about the Pope interfering in domestic social policy. Some wealthy donors threatened to withdraw financial support. But the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Pope Leo Leads began trending worldwide. Veterans organizations expressed cautious optimism. Other religious leaders, including prominent Protestant ministers, Jewish rabbis, and Muslim imams, voiced support for the initiative and pledged to join the effort. Michael became the unexpected face of the movement. Reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence, he began speaking to groups of veterans, sharing his story and encouraging others to seek help. The media couldn't get enough of him, the homeless vet who had inadvertently inspired a global movement simply by being noticed by the Pope. Behind the scenes, however, Pope Leo and Michael formed a genuine friendship. The pontiff regularly visited the transition home that Michael now helped to run, often without cameras or publicity. They would sit together in the small garden, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just sharing comfortable silence. Leo learned about the complex realities of warfare, about the psychological wounds that often cut deeper than physical ones. Michael, in turn, found himself drawn to Leo's spiritual perspective, his ability to acknowledge pain while still maintaining hope. 6 months after their first encounter, Pope Leo invited Michael to join him on an official visit to Chicago, the city where Leo had been born and raised as Robert Francis Prevost before his calling to the priesthood. The homecoming was emotional for the Pope, who had spent much of his adult life as a missionary in Peru before being elevated to cardinal by the late Pope Francis. During a Mass at Holy Name Cathedral, Leo spoke of his childhood in the South side of Chicago, of the poverty he had witnessed and the lessons he had learned about community and resilience. Then, in a move that caused security personnel to nearly faint, he abruptly deviated from his prepared homily and invited Michael to address the congregation. Michael, visibly nervous but determined, limped to the pulpit. His voice shook at first, then steadied as he spoke of his own journey, from proud service to the despair of homelessness, from isolation to community, from being invisible to being seen. "The thing about being homeless," he said, "isn't just the physical hardship. It's the way people look through you, not at you. It's becoming invisible." Pope Leo didn't just see me that day in Rome. He recognized me. He acknowledged my humanity. And sometimes, that's all it takes to save a life. There wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. When Michael finished speaking, Pope Leo embraced him before the altar, a moment of genuine connection that transcended religious ceremony and spoke to something more fundamental about human dignity and compassion. The visit to Chicago coincided with the announcement that an anonymous donor had provided funding for 5 new veterans transition homes across the United States. The media speculated wildly about the identity of the donor, with theories ranging from tech billionaires to foreign governments. In reality, Pope Leo had privately sold several valuable artworks from the Vatican's collection. a controversial decision that he justified by stating simply, "People matter more than possessions." As the Pope's initiative gained momentum, it faced inevitable challenges. Bureaucratic obstacles slowed progress. Some properties faced zoning issues. There were disagreements about program implementation and questions about long-term sustainability. Critics accused the Pope of grandstanding, of using the issue for publicity while ignoring other pressing social concerns. Leo addressed these criticisms directly during an interview with a skeptical journalist. Of course, this initiative alone cannot solve veteran homelessness, he acknowledged. Of course, there are other important issues facing our world, but we must start somewhere. We must show that change is possible. If the Church cannot stand with the most vulnerable, then what purpose does it serve? The journalist pushed harder. Some say you're overstepping your role as a religious leader, that you should focus on spiritual matters and leave social policy to governments. Leo smiled gently. Christ didn't separate the spiritual from the social. He fed the hungry. He healed the sick. He touched the untouchable. The gospel isn't just about preparing souls for heaven. It's about creating heaven on earth through love in action. A year after their first meeting, Pope Leo and Michael returned to the exact spot in St. Peter's Square where they had encountered each other. This time, they weren't alone. Dozens of formerly homeless veterans from around the world stood with them, each with their own story of challenge and resilience, each now involved in helping others like themselves. In a simple ceremony, Leo blessed the cornerstone for a new memorial to be erected in the Vatican Gardens, not a traditional monument of marble and grandeur, but a humble bench identical to the one where he had first sat with Michael. The plaque would read simply, "No one is invisible in the eyes of God." The initiative continued to evolve and expand. Partnerships formed with universities to study best practices for veteran reintegration. Medical professionals volunteered their services. Corporate sponsors provided job training and employment opportunities. Religious communities of all faiths opened their doors and resources. What had begun as a spontaneous moment of compassion had transformed into a global movement. Yet, through it all, Leo insisted on maintaining personal connections with the people being served. He knew many of the veterans by name, remembered details about their families, celebrated their successes, and mourned their setbacks. During a private moment, a cardinal close to Leo asked him why this particular cause had become so central to his papacy when there were so many competing priorities. "When I saw Michael that day," Leo replied thoughtfully, "I saw Christ, not in some abstract theological sense, but in the most concrete way possible. I saw suffering that demanded a response. I saw dignity that deserved recognition. I saw potential that needed opportunity." He paused, looking out the window toward St. Peter's Square. The Church doesn't exist for itself. It exists to continue Christ's work in the world. And that work always begins with seeing the person right in front of you, not as a problem to be solved or a statistic to be managed, but as a brother or sister with inherent value and purpose. 2 years after their first meeting, Michael stood before a crowd at the dedication of the 20th transition home, this one in his hometown of Boston. He looked different now, healthier, more confident, his eyes clear and purposeful. As he prepared to cut the ribbon, he spotted a familiar figure at the back of the crowd, dressed simply in a black cassock without any of the papal regalia. Pope Leo had come unannounced without media or security, simply to support his friend. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Michael gave a slight nod of recognition and gratitude. No words were needed between them anymore. Later that evening, they sat together on the rooftop of the new facility, looking out over the Boston skyline. As the sun set, "Did you ever imagine this?" Michael asked, gesturing at the city below, at all that had changed. "When you walked up to me that day, did you have any idea what would happen?" Leo shook his head. I just saw someone who needed to be seen. Everything else, the commission, the homes, the programs, that all came later. But it began with that simplest of human connections, with recognition. You could have just given me money, Michael pointed out. That would have been easier. Money alone doesn't heal wounds, Leo replied. Community heals wounds. Purpose heals wounds. Being valued for who you are, not just what you need, that heals wounds. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle. Two unlikely friends from vastly different worlds, connected by a chance encounter that had grown into something neither could have imagined. You know, Michael said finally, I wasn't religious when we met. I was angry at God, actually, felt, abandoned. And now? Leo asked gently. Michael considered the question. Now I think maybe God works through people, through connections, through someone simply taking the time to stop and really see another person. Leo smiled. I believe that too. In a world often divided by politics, religion, and ideology, the friendship between Pope Leo XIII and a homeless veteran named Michael offered a different narrative, one of authentic human connection, transcending barriers of compassion leading to concrete action, of how seemingly small moments of recognition can ripple outward in unexpected ways. Their story continues to inspire others to stop, to see, to connect. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to acknowledge the humanity of the person right in front of you. As Pope Leo often says, quoting his namesake Leo XIII but adding his own twist, the greatest work of charity is not what we give, but who we recognize. For in truly seeing another, we glimpse the face of God. The next morning, as dawn broke over Rome, Pope Leo XIV once again walked across St. Peter's Square. This time his eyes were even more attentive, searching the shadows for those who might otherwise remain unseen. Because he now understood more deeply than ever before. Recognition is where transformation begins. And in a world that often rushes past suffering, the simple act of stopping and truly seeing another person might be the most radical act of all.